The story begins on a gloomy night. A seemingly innocent young man named Edmund enters the housing facility of priests with the excuse of a broken car, but his actual motive is something more sinister. He goes on a killing rampage and murders 4 priests, among which is his biological father, who abandoned his mother, which indirectly led to her death. The time skips to 6 months later, where a nurse by the name of Ratched is driving to the Lucia State Hospital, a mental institution in the state of California. Ratched has made a lot of preparations to be able to work in this institution. However, she is not hired yet. She walks up to the reception area and shows an employee a letter that the head of the hospital, Dr. Hanover, has written to her. The employee calls in the head nurse to inspect the letter immediately, but funnily enough, she notices that the signature on the letter does not belong to Dr. Hanover. Hinting that the letter is forged, the head nurse tries to shoo away Ratched by making various excuses of Dr. Hanover's absence, but Ratched is nothing but determined to have her interview for the position of a nurse inside the facility. Unable to deter her, the head nurse reluctantly lets her remain in the waiting area while she goes on about her tasks. At the same time, Dr. Hanover is at the governor's office, where he yet again fails to get a meeting with him. He goes to a bar to drink away his frustrations when surprisingly, he stumbles upon the governor and manages to speak a few words with him. All this time, the governor remains short-tempered and dismissive and also refuses to hear about the funding of the Lucia State Hospital. He has no respect for the facility, nor for Dr. Hanover, as he all but chases the doctor away with his harsh words. Feeling humiliated and enraged, Dr. Hanover returns to the facility in such a bad mood that even the head nurse grows a little fearful of him, but he still has to conduct an interview with Ratched that he does not remember agreeing to. When he meets Ratched, he is completely impressed by her words and her work experience, evaporating all his anger in an instant. She tries her best to sell her resume and get hired, but unfortunately, no matter how impressed Dr. Hanover is with her, the hospital does not have enough funding to hire another nurse. But Ratched is not one to give up so easily. If the facility does not have a place for her, then she will simply make one. So she blackmails one of the nurses of the facility with her love affair and convinces her to leave her position. At the same time, by pure coincidence, the governor's secretary suddenly has an idea of promoting the Lucia State Hospital for the sake of the governor's re-election. The facility instantly comes alive to make arrangements for the governor's visit, where he will be bringing along reporters with him. But there is one problem: the facility is short-staffed. Since Dr. Hanover already has a high opinion of Ratched, he immediately sends her a request to lend them a hand, to which she gladly agrees. So on the day of the governor's visit, she works among the nurses of the facility in proper uniform. However, she is still full of schemes. In order to highlight her presence, she intentionally gives the wrong medication to a patient, and then, in front of a large audience, including the governor and the journalists, she performs a procedure to save his life. The governor is thoroughly impressed by her, but getting into his good graces is not enough, as the head nurse has already figured out that she is the one responsible for giving the wrong medication to the patient. So before she spills her misdeeds to Dr. Hanover, Ratched hatches another plan. She approaches a depressed patient and uses a very sympathetic tone to convince him that he should unalive himself to escape from his sufferings. She leads him to Dr. Hanover's office and points him to the letter opener on the table before quietly leaving the room. By the time Dr. Hanover comes in to confront Ratched about her switching the medication, the depressed patient has already offed himself inside the office bathroom. All the doctor's anger is immediately replaced with panic, as he cannot figure out how to deal with a body when the press is just outside the door. At this time, Ratched smoothly approaches him to play savior. She promises to take care of this incident and urges the doctor to go outside and entertain the guests. Dr. Hanover's good impression of her skyrockets as he quickly agrees to appoint her as a nurse. As he goes out to engage the governor, Ratched swiftly disposes of the body by throwing it into a burner. A few days later, a high-profile criminal is brought to the facility for analyzing his mental state, and this criminal is none other than Edmund, Ratched's foster brother, whom she is willing to free no matter what the cost. Days go by and Dr. Hanover has finally perfected the lobotomy procedure. He gathers 4 patients in the operating theater and gives a demonstration in front of all the facility staff along with some political officials. Unfortunately, the lobotomy proves to be too gruesome in the eyes of the general public as the officials start to feel queasy and one of them even ends up fainting. The scene skips to a church where Ratched visits a priest who is the only survivor of Edmund's rampage. Ever since the day he witnessed his fellow priests being murdered, his mental state has not been very stable. Ratched calmly walks up to him and strikes up a conversation. She is there to convince him to have a meeting with Dr. Hanover in order to talk about Edmund's condition. She claims that she wants Edmund to face the highest punishment, but for her wish to come true, Dr. Hanover has to give out a proper diagnosis, and the priest is the only one who could convince the doctor about how dangerous Edmund really is. The priest does not give a definite answer, but he does not refuse her request either. A few days later, at the Lucia State Hospital, Dr. Hanover has created a less frightening procedure to perform lobotomy that will not agitate the general public. He gathers up all the facility staff in the operating theater and performs the procedure on 2 corpses. This time, he uses an unassuming ice pick instead of a drill. He demonstrates the new method by inserting the ice pick above the subject's eye socket and hitting it with a hammer. This nauseates the head nurse and she ends up vomiting on the spot. Dr. Hanover is enraged by her weakness and shouts at her to get out. At the same time, Ratched proves her uniqueness by being interested in the procedure and praising Dr. Hanover for his genius. After some sweet talking, she is able to smoothly insert her request to let Edmund have a bar of soap to wash himself instead of being hit by a hose like a barbarian. Dr. Hanover agrees to her request. It does not make a big difference, but Ratched believes that it is a start. One day, while she is having her lunch, Ratched is approached by the governor's secretary who offers to take her out on a trip. They have a lovely lunch together and notice that they get along quite well. So for the next destination, the secretary boldly takes them to a lesbian bar far out of town. Ratched is shocked beyond words. She is disgusted to realize that the secretary would think that she is a lesbian and would bring her to such a place. She stomps away from the secretary and promptly ends their time together. Back at the mental facility, Dr. Hanover has a private meeting with Edmund in his office. Edmund acts all crazy and schizophrenic, but the doctor can easily see through his pretense. He tries to convince Edmund that he does not need to act this way because the doctor genuinely wants him to escape the death penalty and get better. But unless Edmund agrees to cooperate, Dr. Hanover is powerless to help him. However, Edmund refuses to shed his act, even as he is taken away from the office by a guard. A few days later, Ratched gets a call from the priest, who agrees to give his testimony against Edmund to aid Dr. Hanover's diagnosis. She immediately sets up a meeting with him and drives him to a faraway hotel. Under the guise of preparing an audio tape for the doctor, she takes him to a room before giving him a cup of tea laced with a sedative. As soon as he drinks the tea, he feels groggy and then quickly passes out. When the priest wakes up again, he finds that he is tightly strapped to the bed with his mouth covered. He watches in horror as Ratched comes into sight with an ice pick in one hand and a hammer in the other. And then she proceeds to perform the new version of lobotomy on the imprisoned priest. Days pass and some police officers visit the church to take the priest to testify against Edmund. But ever since he came back from the trip with Ratched, he has been absent-minded and is now unable to form words, which makes him useless as a witness. The scene skips to a fancy mansion where a wealthy heiress gets a report from the private investigator she hired. The target of the investigation is Dr. Hanover, who is currently using a false name to operate the Lucia Hospital. The heiress has a grudge against him for performing his barbaric procedures on her son that rendered him limbless. She promises the investigator $250,000 in exchange for Dr. Hanover's life. The investigator, who also works as a hitman, readily agrees in the face of such a large sum. Back at the mental institute, Dr. Hanover puts the head nurse in charge of the new procedure he invented to cure lesbianism. The head nurse asks Ratched to help her with a terrible procedure where the patient must soak in scalding hot water for some time and then immediately followed by soaking in an ice bath. When the patient screams in agony, Ratched wants to halt the procedure as she finds it inhumane, but the head nurse is adamant to follow through all the steps provided by Dr. Hanover. This event scars all the facility members who are present in the room, more than scars for the patient, but the head nurse looks on in satisfaction. At the same time, inside the governor's office, the governor is adamant to execute the death penalty for Edmund, even if he has to bribe Dr. Hanover to provide false reports. But Edmund, who is still locked up inside the underground cell of Lucia Hospital, has already begun his escape plan. For now, he successfully seduces a young nurse into helping him relieve himself. When Ratched hears of this news, she is speechless and vows to take care of the matter. A few days pass, and one day, while refueling his car, Dr. Hanover is suddenly met with a bullet that barely misses his head. He sees a hitman standing behind his car with a gun, and his heart bursts with panic. He quickly steps on the accelerator and drives his car away at full speed, with the hitman closely following him. Thankfully, he is somehow able to escape the assassination attempt. That night, Ratched has a sexual encounter with a hitman who has been continuously eyeing her ever since she started living next door to him. But during the act, she cannot stop the images of the governor's secretary flashing inside her mind. This causes both her and the hitman's experience to be unpleasant, and Ratched is left alone in her room to ponder over her tangled feelings. All the while, the secretary is also unable to keep her mind off of Ratched. She is even willing to dissolve her sham marriage with her gay husband to pursue her true love. The next day at the Lucia mental facility, Dr. Hanover is being pestered by the head nurse because the relatives of one of their depressed patients have come looking for him. What she does not know is that the patient is already dead. Dr. Hanover feels very flustered about the situation, but Ratched arrives just in time to intervene. The doctor breathes a sigh of relief when Ratched skillfully changes the topic and manages to drive the head nurse away. Dr. Hanover is feeling grateful towards her, so she takes this opportunity to invite him to dinner at a seaside restaurant. Just as the doctor is happily enjoying his meal, Ratched suddenly asks him about the hitman. Dr. Hanover is at a complete loss for words when she refuses to reveal how she got this information. In the beginning, the doctor is reluctant to speak about this matter, but she convinces him by saying that the two of them are already accomplices in hiding the dead body of one of their patients. Dr. Hanover silently accepts her logic and begins narrating his story. A few years ago, he was contacted by a wealthy heiress in order to cure his son who had a fetish for pricking people with tiny things, but his tendencies kept getting violent by the day. Dr. Hanover asked for a full day with a young man to examine him, and the heiress left for another country, leaving the doctor and the young man alone. During his consultation, he put a small dose of medicine in the young man's glass of water for him to drink, but when Dr. Hanover was distracted, the man sneakily poured out the rest of the entire medicine from the bottle into the doctor's drink. As the two of them drank from their respective glasses, Dr. Hanover slowly realized that something was terribly wrong. The young man was running around acting completely insane, but the doctor, who ingested a much higher dose of the medicine, was in a trance-like state and was unable to move easily. In his fit of madness, the young man ripped off the gardener's arms and then proceeded to saw off his own in order to do an arm transplant. Panicked, Dr. Hanover immediately moved to conduct the transplant himself. He had no proper medical equipment and his body was not very cooperative, but even so, Dr. Hanover tried his best to at least connect the blood vessels so that he could save the young man's life. But as expected, the procedure only saved his life, but the infection that had spread to the young man's legs caused him to lose all 4 of his limbs. So naturally, the mother holds a bitter grudge against him and wants him dead in the most painful way possible. As Dr. Hanover concludes his terrible story, Ratched moves quickly to reassure him with gentle words and offers to help him hide. And this is where the episode ends. And that's a wrap for this series recap. Thanks for watching.